Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Happy Recap Radio Show. I am glad to be with you. EJ is glad to be with you. We're just glad to be back in the saddle for this week. I can't believe it is October already. We're in the second full week of October. I cannot believe that either, EJ. I tell you, for a year that has gone terribly slowly, I'm counting down the days to the new year like everybody else, but to already be in October, deep into the heart of playoff baseball, is pretty amazing at this point.
Yeah, I think when they announced that they were going to start up the league, we all severely questioned whether we would actually reach this point of deep into playoff baseball, or if they were going to eventually have to shut it down all over again. And I guess we're fortunate that they never had to. And here we are watching playoff baseball. It's been a nice distraction from real life. But, I mean, I'm with you, man. I can't believe it's October. It feels like in one way that my whole family went into quarantine like just a couple of weeks ago. And in other days, it feels like we've been in quarantine for years. I have no concept of time or dates or anything. But when I flipped the calendar to October, I was kind of like, wow, really? That just happened?
You know, it's one of those things that when I wake up, I keep, like everybody else in the world, pretty much, I keep my cell phone next to me and on the bedside, partially because there's an on-call element to my job. But normally the first thing I do is, if the alarm hasn't gone off, I hit the button. I take a look to see what time it is. I have found more and more, I am looking, before I even look at the time, I am looking at the day of the week and the date. Because I don't know. I literally do not know on which morning I am waking up, and I need to know that before I know the time, because it dictates what I do with my day.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. My son has off school tomorrow and observance of Columbus Day. And we were talking about it in the car earlier. And I was like, yeah, bud, you have off tomorrow? And he's like, why do I have off on a Wednesday? And I'm like, dude, today is Sunday. Why would you possibly think that today is Tuesday? And he's like, it's just so confusing, Dad. I was like, well, I can relate, buddy. I get there. I actually had a day last week, and I'm sure we've all had those days where it's a Thursday, but in your head you think it's a Friday all day. Well, I had a day last week where it was Tuesday, and I thought it was Friday all day. So that really stung come waking up Wednesday morning.
Yeah, we had an upset daughter, I think it was last weekend, who was just getting on our case because we would not take her to school on Saturday.
Yeah.
Today's Saturday. No, it's not. It's Wednesday. And then she's like, Tuesday. I'm like, okay, maybe pay attention when they're doing the days in school. Keep doing that. But trust me, it's Saturday. And of course, she can't spell yet, so I can't literally prove it to her. See, on the phone, it says Saturday. But yeah, it's, these are the days that are confusing. They're a little, a little bit odd. And, I think that as we kind of, make it through 2020, there's certain situations that continue to get weirder and odder. And, one of those that we're talking about just again this past week, in the terms of 2020, the last show we did, so obviously we talked quite a bit about, the franchise himself, Tom Seaver, but you look at things now and it's like, boy, the Hall of Fame has taken an irreparable hit in the legends that have died in the last month and a half. I mean, you lost Whitey Ford, we've lost Tom Seaver, Lou Brock, Bob Gibson. That's half a dream team right there. It's certainly a hell of a front end of a rotation and some speed to lead off a lineup. It's just one of those things. As much of a distraction as baseball has been, baseball has taken its hits.
Oh man, I mean, you talk about aces upon aces. I mean, how does God go about sorting out that rotation of just those three top tier pitchers? But the chairman of the board of the franchise and Bob Gibson, downright one of the nastiest pitchers you've ever seen in your life. I mean, that is just some serious firepower that's gone up to the pearly gates, and it's unfortunate, but unfortunately, it also seems par for the course for this year.
Yeah, and it's certainly obvious. I mean, one of the things I point out as we kind of advance through our own lives and get older, unfortunately, those of us occupying the letter X of generations, that a lot of our heroes are now getting in sports in entertainment. I mean, I'm thinking, obviously Eddie Van Halen pops to mind just this past week that, you go, oh, Eddie Van Halen died. How old was he? 65. It's like, how did our heroes get to 65? How did our heroes get to 75? I mean, it's, obviously the progression of the years, it's basic biology, but for me, it's, unfortunately for a generation that wasn't necessarily known for taking great care of itself, especially on the entertainment front, you know, this is the one element of 2020 I sadly don't expect to lose in 21, 22 or beyond.
Yeah, I mean, from the entertainment field, it's crazy to think that in just over a year, we've lost Prince, Tom Petty, Neil Peart, David Bowie, and now Eddie Van Halen. That's insane. These are guys, with the exception of Prince, I've saw every one of those guys in concert multiple times. These were my high school years, my college years. These are the guys who I idolized, and to see them going at such a rapid pace is really, it's disheartening, and it definitely makes you feel your own mortality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, these are the voices that's the images of our youth. I mean, both from the sports and entertainment world. So so there you go. A couple old guys reminiscing a little bit about days of yore, as the Mets season, of course, ended uh, uneventfully, I guess is the best way to put it. Certainly, we managed to do pretty good in a lot of areas and not so good in others. I kind of wanted to get a couple of thoughts out of you. One of the questions I have as we look towards the potential of a GM change in coming weeks with the incoming new Steve Cohen. How do you grade somebody like Brodie Van Wagenen? I want to take that a step further. How do you grade him? How do you, and any other person who has really filled that role since Jeff Wilpon really stepped into the COO role? With the amount of reported meddling and interference and puppetry that has gone on, obviously Steve Cohen will bring in who Steve Cohen wants, and that's his right, and he should do that. But can we really, if we are about to walk away from Brodie Van Wagenen, can we really judge what kind of general manager he was during his brief time here?
It's difficult to. I think on the one hand, obviously he was hamstrung by having a meddling owner and having a limited payroll. So that definitely is going to hurt any general manager across the game. But at the same time, he was given the ability to make some moves, and you evaluate the moves he made and whether or not they were successful or not. A lot of people will argue whether or not the Cano trade was a success or not. I didn't expect Robbie Cano to actually be the upside of that trade for us. But of course, he kind of had been. So I think in one regard, yes, he's overpaid, and he is Brodie's former client. But I think that's really Brodie's biggest move. And I personally don't consider it a very successful trade just based on how the results have overall been out of the bullpen on that, which was the big part of that trade. At the same time, yeah, I don't think if Brodie Van Wagenen wants to maintain a management position in baseball, I don't think he should be denied any opportunity to interview for jobs because, again, this is a very unique situation that I just don't think is fair to any executive who is GMing underneath the Wilpons.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I look at, and you hear some rumors about some people who could be in the mix for things, and including the name we've heard literally come up every time that there's been an opening the last 15 years internally, and that's John Ricco, whose reputation is stellar throughout baseball. And you just kind of hope to some extent. I mean, we've all heard great things about John Ricco, and I don't know that he is the person to be the next general manager of the New York Mets, but he seems like somebody at the very least who could potentially be someone that Sandy mentors into his position, because you figure that Sandy Alderson's coming on board, I believe, at age 73. This is probably not a 10-year job for him, and I doubt he sees it that way. So I'm sure there's going to be some look to see who he could mentor and into an heir. But I look at Ricco, and I do say this is a guy who put up with a lot of crap from the Wilpons. and still managed to remain liked by them for their entire tenure working together. Despite the times they tossed him around, decided to go for bigger names, etc. I can't help but root for the guy and hope that somehow he gets a pretty good position out of this.
I mean, anybody who's paid their dues the way he has for so long underneath this Wilpon regime, I definitely agree deserves a shot. And I do love the idea of Sandy Alderson being in that mentorship role. We've never seen what Sandy Alderson can do with a true top market budget. And I think we'll have the ability to see that right now. And I think Rico is a good, logical choice. There are some names outside the organization that have been bandied about, but I personally, if it's going to be Sandy as the running the show overall with Rico as the GM, I think that's a perfectly acceptable 1-2 punch for this team.
Yeah, and if you can keep Barrett and Minaya, and certainly Minaya would be the better candidate over the two of them to stick around. I mean, there certainly may be opportunities for Barrett outside the organization, and he was kind of Brody's guy to begin with. But with Minaya being a longtime friend of Cohen's, to have somebody like that for Rico to use as a resource as well, keeps that front office ticking, and they're not going to miss anything in there.
Yeah, definitely not. I think that's a pretty good brain trust that you could put in place. I agree about Omar. I actually really like Omar in the role he's in right now. Say what you will about the guy's time as a GM. The guy simply knows how to scout, and particularly scout international talent. And I think that's so important right now, given how few teams' fortunes are changed via free agency right now, that the draft is more important now than ever, I would argue. So I definitely love Omar in that role, and I think he should stick around.
Yeah, and I think I like what they've done with that portion of things. I also do like the strategy that Brody and Tommy and the rest of the draft team has used on kind of replenishing the system after the Cano trade. I would say that, obviously without knowing what type of player Kelenic is going to wind up being, it's hard to truly say, but I feel like for the available talent he had to work with, I do feel like overall he's done as good of a job as possible replacing talent with the draft.
Agreed. They definitely restocked the stockpile a bit. There's definitely some excitement coming up through the next couple of years through the farm system. The farm system was, let's face it, a couple of years ago was as bare bones as it gets after all the splashy guys, your Harveys, your Syndergaards, your Jakes. Once they had all made their debut, we definitely had a little dry spell period there where we were like, wow, where's the next batch of guys coming from? And I do feel that they've done a good job of restocking the shelves a bit with the farm system. And there are some youthful, exciting guys that we're looking at, as we saw this year with the emergence of Jimenez.
Yeah, I mean, and it's one of those things that back a couple of years ago when we were doing the original show and the Mets had their AAA affiliate in Las Vegas, I had a chance to see them once or twice a year up in Tacoma, and every year be like, okay, who's the guy? And I mean, at one point, you had a Vegas team with Syndergaard, DeGrom, and Matz all on that team, and then one year, about right after Matz got called up, saw them a couple months later. It's like, ain't nobody left. I have no idea. There's nobody here. There's not a prospect in this bunch. There's not the talent is just not there. I don't know where it is, but it's not a AAA anymore. And for the remainder of their time in Las Vegas, which was another season and a half or so, it just wasn't. The interesting thing, we talk about Jimenez, and at some point this winter we'll have our good friend Joe DeMeo on and talk a little bit about the Mets prospect system. There's certainly talk that you have several tiers of shortstops within the Mets organization, and more than a few people believe the best is actually yet to come in Ronnie Mauricio.
Yeah, that's why I think it's probably likely, maybe not this offseason, but in the near future, I think it's likely that you see them move on from Rosario or Jimenez. It could be either of them that get moved in a trade based on the depth that they're going to have at the position right now. Rosario obviously regressed a little bit this year, but at the same time, 60-game season, it's really damn hard to judge a guy off that sample size. Took his benching like a champion, I thought. I thought he was wise beyond his years in that regards when all of a sudden he just found himself stuck on the bench after a massive game one night, and then he sits the next 4 nights. And I thought he took it like a champion. He showed maturity beyond his years, but I do think at some point they move on from one of those guys because, like you said, Mauricio's coming, and he has been touted as the best of the bunch.
You know, it's one of those things. I think when I look at the two of them, I mean, I think that one of the things I think we forget, we think of Rosario as this hardened veteran at this point. And the fact of the matter is, you take Jimenez off this roster, he is still actually by quite a bit the youngest player on the team. I believe he'll be 25 at opening day next year. Rosario is not necessarily a complete picture at this point, which is always kind of scary to think about dealing somebody like that. I think if I'm whoever the next general manager is, or at least whoever the general manager is when the decision needs to be made, whether that's Brody, whether that's Sandy, whether that's John Ricco or another name not yet known, I would probably trade of the two of them. I would probably trade the one I could get the best return for, because either one of them is adequate to serve, more than adequate to serve, until we know what we have in Ronnie Mauricio.
Yeah, the question is, which guy is it?
Don't know. I think you'd have to shop them both out there and see what comes back.
Flip a coin. I mean, personally, Rosario's a nice player, and I think if he reverts back to last year form, he's a very nice player. But when you see that glove of Jimenez, that's a generational glove. That's a Ray Ordonez glove. I mean, it is really hard.
With an actual bat.
Right. It is really hard to justify moving such an unbelievable talent defensively off of this team. And Rosario's done a very nice job improving his defense, I felt. But, I mean, Jimenez is that's like a guy that you're not going to see a defender of his caliber up the middle for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a hard sell. I mean, I think you have a situation like I look at like the Indians, for example, who could be in the market for a shortstop this offseason, because I think Lindor is going to get dealt finally, and they're going to want somebody they can control a while. And obviously, Jimenez would have longer control than Ahmed would have. But I would certainly try to get them to take Ahmed over. I mean, Ahmed would be the one I probably would try harder to trade. But because of the years of control, you're probably going to maybe get slightly more for Jimenez, even though you lose some points for not being proven. So it should be very interesting. Speaking of Cleveland, I'm thinking about a player who isn't in Cleveland anymore. I switched to the other side of Ohio during the last year's trading deadline. The electricity at Citi Field has always been pretty good, especially in a hot game. But can Citi Field, in your opinion, handle a Bauer outage?
Absolutely not. I want no part of this guy. He is look, I love Syndergaard. Syndergaard has become a little bit of a diva over the past couple of years. Let's face it.
Fair.
The last thing we need to do, and Syndergaard also loves having Twitter wars amongst fans, among back and forth. Some of it's clever. Some of it kind of feels mean-spirited. The last thing we need is another guy with that kind of chip on his shoulder. Don't get me wrong. He's a phenomenal pitcher, but I want no part of him on this Mets team.
I mean, he's the kind of guy that if they bring him in, I'll root for him, because I'm a big fan of root for the suit. I don't care who's in it, because I want the win. I choose never to root against the team so that somebody I didn't like suffers. I mean, I can tell you right now, in 1984, my least favorite player in baseball was Gary Carter. In 1985, he was one of my top 3 favorites. So, the suit changes a lot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Carter was a Met killer. So, we all hated him. But, with Bauer, it's kind of like I look at it, and my big tug is that between him and Stroman, I mean, that's the cream of the crop right now as far as available free agent pitchers. And, we look at having to give up some talent, and we might, to get something that good. I mean, I think they have to look at it. I agree with you. I'm on your page on that in the sense that I don't particularly want the Bauer show, every night at Citi Field. I don't think giving Bauer the power with a team with its own network is necessarily a good idea, because you're going to wind up with Bauer TV or something like that. But I think that for this team, the desperate need for pitching, you just can't. Unfortunately, you can't dismiss him on personality alone, because he's been so good, because he is so good. And this is a guy that's in the middle of his prime, and those don't come up too often either. Am I going to go down with pitchforks and torches if they don't sign him? Absolutely not. And I'll wish whoever signs him all the luck in the world controlling him. But if they picked him up, I'm not gonna throw something up against the wall either. I just go, boy, I hope this works out okay.
Well, I see where you're coming from, because I mean, if you look at the free agent crop of starting pitching this offseason, one thing that's like glaringly stands out at you is the majority of them are guys who were at one time very good, are now 35 plus, and are going to be free agents. So there's a lot of those guys on the market. So if you're looking at really the two young studs being Bauer and Stroman, I figure you have to lock up one of them. My preference is to lock up Stroman. But
and
if
mine.
not, yeah, right. But if not, I guess, yeah, you do have to approach him. And then I think, as far as the back of the rotation goes, given we don't know what the depth is going to be like, what the roster size is going to be like next year, even how many games we're going to play yet next year, I think you grab a bunch of those 35-plus-year-old guys and stash them and see if any of them still have a little life left in the tank, because there's some names out there that you're like, hey, that guy was great once, and see if you can work a little magic. I don't want to call it the scrap heap, because I don't necessarily consider these guys to be scraps, but just kind of load up the inventory and make sure that in the event of catastrophic starting pitching injuries again, that you've got those shelves nice and full as well.
I think that, obviously we've seen a change over the past couple of years where a lot of pitchers, if they can't get that big league deal and a promise of a role, they'd rather sit home with their family at this point, mainly because they've made so much money earlier in their career. It doesn't matter anymore. That dynamic has changed. I agree with you in concept. That's absolutely what they should do. I've just seen the teams that have tried to do that, have fallen by the wayside. At the same time, you need those guys. On the other hand, if you need them too much, you wind up in a situation like the Mets did this year with right. Porcello and Wacha, 3 out of every 5 days. And that's not so good. Especially because you've got to figure out the other thing about your rotation that you need to figure out, and you need to at least have some idea of what you're doing before the deadline to non-tender contracts is. How do you solve a problem like Steven?
So we were going to talk a little bit, and I'll just touch it real quick on what we were happy about this season and what we were disappointed with. And my two biggest disappointments about this season are obviously Pete Alonso and Steven Matz.
Agreed.
I really thought this was going to be a turning point for Matz, particularly when everyone was going down and he was going to have to slide into that number 2 spot in the rotation. I had a ton of faith that Matz was going to come through in that spot. And to see him not was really disheartening. He's a guy you want to root for. He's a guy who's easy to root for. And at this point, though, I don't know that you can consider him a lot. Well, definitely not a lock for the rotation, but I don't know what you do with him for heading into next season. Do you let him compete for a 5th starter spot? Do you tell him he's going to be that swingman out of the pen who is going to work long relief, but he could also get a spot start here and there? I really don't know what to do with Steven Matz. I think a lot of it's going to come down to, and I'm assuming that Jeremy Hefner will be back as pitching coach, to see what he sees in Matz in the spring and where he projects him coming out of the spring.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I believe that you will see, I do think you'll see Jeremy Hefner back as pitching coach. I think you'll see Luis Rojas back as manager. From there, it gets a little touchy. Because a lot of these guys were Beltran's picks, or they pre-exist. So it should be interesting to see what the coaching staff looks like. I don't think there's going to be a tremendous shakeup, but there could be a name or two swapped out here and there. But I look at exactly the same thing. It's like with Steven Matz, what I probably do is I probably do tender him a contract, which obviously I think it's March 20th. I think you have to decide if you're going to keep him or cut him and pay him like $60,000 or something like that. I immediately put him into a competition with David Peterson for that number 5 role, and whoever's winning it on March 20th gets it.
Yeah, I mean, I
And if
got to the
Matz
point.
loses it, I'm not putting him in the bullpen. He's getting cut.
Right. I'm not against that idea because I think Peterson proved that he could be that left-handed guy in the middle of the rotation for you if need be. He definitely had a better and more successful year than Matz. And who knows if competition could breed the best out of both of them. And if now all of a sudden you're looking at a scenario where you have 2 decent lefties in the rotation, huzzah, so be it. I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think David Peterson is one of those guys that I think he could succeed to some level as a number 3, but he's best suited as a 4 or 5,
Yep.
Especially on a competing team. But the reality of it is Matt's. I mean, he looked lost out there, and yeah, we've known Steven Matz for a long time. We had him on this show a week or 2 after he got drafted. I think it was certainly right shortly thereafter. And one of the hardest interviews I've ever done. He was a very, very quiet kid. I've been rooting for him ever since. The Long Island boy was on our show, really good. I mean, all the injuries it took to get there. I mean, you just wanted this kid to make it. And the Steven Matz we saw out there in 15 and 16, I didn't see that at all. I didn't see that at all in 20.
Yeah, we definitely didn't see that at all. And that's the most frustrating part is that we did see a different version of Matz in years past. And we've seen him go on stretches where he's absolutely dominant for multiple starts in a row. I'm hoping that we chalk it up to just 2020 is being 2020. Short season, maybe never had time to find his rhythm, maybe never felt great because he had a couple of tweaked injuries this year. And hopefully we look at a season next year, 2021, where things are more normalized. Hopefully they're playing full schedules. Hopefully they're playing 162. Hopefully the friggin' DH is out of the National League. Yeah, right, EJ. And then him having a full spring training, being around his coaches for a full spring training, and hopefully we can get Matz back to form. We know the talent is there. I'm just not sure what fell apart for him in 2020.
So looking at the flip side of the coin, we talk about our 2 disappointments there. And I don't think we need to really necessarily go that in depth on Pete Alonso. The fact is he regressed. And I think that, he looked like Dave Kingman this year. I think that's kind of the key. I have the faith in him to kind of work on it. I'm certainly not writing him off, but it did feel like the Mets were more productive in the days where Dom Smith was at first base and not Pete Alonso.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, you talk about our disappointments. Well, my number 1 positive was Dom Smith and his continued development. I love seeing where this kid is going. I love his attitude. I love his stick. I love the leadership he showed this year. His defense is vastly improved. So he was my number 1 A+ for 2020, and I can't wait to continue watching him develop.
I mean, I think he's probably my number 1. I mean, I would, Conforto was Conforto. I mean, you can't, probably in a full 162, Conforto gets that nod from me, but Conforto he didn't do any extra. He certainly didn't do any less. He was just Michael Conforto out there and happily sending the message, Mr. Cohen, please sign me. Make Mr. Boris go away for a couple of years.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that, Conforto was Conforto. Dom's my number 1 on the offensive side. Pitching, it's going to ruffle some feathers, but I got to give it to Diaz. I mean, his statistics, the way he pitched out there, yeah, he gave up a couple home runs, and Lord knows, do not put that man in with people on base. But you give him a clean inning, and some of his pitching was nasty. And I think next to DeGrom, I think he had the most hits that I noticed anyway over on the I just forgotten that awesome pitching Twitter account off the top of my head. I look at it 10, 15 times a day.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about. That posts like pitching porn, basically.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
It's got the piratey logo.
right,
And I feel terrible about forgetting the name. Rob Friedman is the guy that runs the site, and
right.
off the
Pitching
top of my head,
Ninja,
Pitching Ninja.
Pitching
There it
Ninja.
is,
Yeah,
Pitching Ninja. All right, but I mean, I think he's had the most hits. I mean, that slider was filthy at times. I mean, just unfair. And that's the Edwin Diaz we traded for. Now, I'm not saying the guy is all the way back. I'd like to see him do a little a little better with runners on base coming into those games, because you can't help that. That's going to happen to a closer. He's always going to give up a long ball here or there. I think we can accept that if he does the rest. And obviously the big thing with Edwin Diaz, because I think a lot of us presumed that part of his problems were mental, how is he going to do with a crowd? That's going to be the big question going into 2021. So I kind of give him that A+ on the pitching side, with the proviso that he's able to keep working on his improvement, so that those things are not as much of an issue in 21.
right. Yeah, he. I think the problem with him was the home runs he gave up were so glaringly awful that they were really magnified in a lot of ways. But I agree. I think he's going to bounce back next year. Hopefully we can cut down on the long balls, but I'm really hoping he builds off what I feel is a much better season this year than last year.
I mean, anytime you got a guy in your bullpen or your rotation that averages 19 strikeouts per 9 innings pitched, you just have to kind of go, ooh, okay, what do we got there then?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially because I believe he was at like 8 per 9 last year. So it was an improvement of about 11 strikeouts per 9 innings. So, I mean, that's obviously him and Hefner did very well together.
Yeah, without a doubt. That was a good job by Hefner, getting him back to being that dominant strikeout pitcher and getting him back to using that slider so effectively. And it was, I mean, people don't want to hear it, but it was actually a bounce back year for Diaz.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly, it is remiss. I mean, we talked about the trade. I've got to give an honorable mention for people who impressed. Robinson Cano, that was for as short of a year as it was, he was on his way to all-star caliber numbers in a full season. He just simply was good and solid.
Yeah. It seemed like he was just rolling out of bed and getting on base twice a day. That's all he does. He just collects hits, collects walks, and Robbie had an excellent offensive season.
I mean, he seemed to have more power than he did last year, and that was kind of the problem I had with him. And obviously, I think he was playing more hurt than he ever admitted. But the thing I think with Cano is that he was a singles machine last year, really. He'd get the hits from time to time, especially in the second half of the season, but it's just single after single after single, which is nice. But if you got no one on base, it doesn't do squat. But this was the guy that was only, for like a month, pretty much was like the only guy who could drive in a runner in scoring position on this team. And, he had the power, he had the doubles, he had the home runs. All of his stats were up off of last year. And, I would be a lot more excited about Cano's 2020 if he was 30.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. I'll tell you, the one thing that was interesting was, as adamant as Robbie is that he does not like the DH, he was actually even more effective in his offensive role as the DH. So it'll be interesting to see moving forward next year if Rojas is able to convince him to embrace the designated hitter a little more and accept that role for himself, because he was really damn good as the DH.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that he was good in that role. I mean, I think you certainly have to figure out exactly what you're going to do with the National League DH, if that sticks around, because you have that Dom Smith, Pete Alonso thing going too. Do we constantly put Dom Smith out in left field where he kind of really doesn't belong, just to keep him in the lineup, or do you do that split for now? So it's going to be, these are good problems to have, though. I look at it rather than who on earth is going to be our DH. Instead, we're saying, do we want Robinson Cano or Pete Alonso? Yes, please.
Yeah, nice.
These are good problems. These are the problems that years go by where us as Mets fans would dream of a problem like this.
Yeah, good problems to have, and hopefully ones that we will be able to address moving into the next season.
Absolutely. And, we'll be heading into the off-season here, off-season mode. We'll be back with you here in probably the next week or two. We're certainly heading towards that ownership change. We've got our good friend Howard Megdal, who has joined us many times over the years on ownership issues, writer of the book Wilpon's Folly a few years ago, and also a fantastic book where he detailed the campaign to try and get himself elected general manager of the New York Mets. So being election season, that's the kind of voting I can get down with. But we'll look forward to talking to Howard about that. I know he's got opinions on the outgoing owner, opinions on the incoming owner. So I certainly look forward to hearing him on that. And before we wrap up, though, I did want to take a moment out. We missed a couple weeks worth of shows, and it is one of those things where life gets a little bit a hold of you. And we had 2 weeks up here in the Northwest where I couldn't do a show if I wanted to because my studio smelled and looked of smoke from wildfires, and breathing was that was pretty much all I could do was breathe. EJ has been battling some sickness, and in the middle of that, I know I talked about it with our Tom Seaver story. After 8 years of illness, my father passed away in the middle of September. And, I think about that, and I think about my dad, and I think about this show. He always used to, and I don't even think EJ knows this, when my dad and technology didn't get along. He loved technology, but they didn't get along. He never figured out how to use the channel guide on his cable remote. He would just flip through the channels. I didn't notice it at first, but probably about the first 2-3 months that we were doing this show, after we moved into a house with him, he would sit in the doorway or stand in the doorway and listen to my half of the Happy Recap radio show every week. He couldn't hear you. He couldn't hear Ryan. He couldn't hear our guest, but he'd listen to what I was talking about and talking about the Mets, and he'd always want to talk about the Mets afterwards. And that, this is the guy who took me to my first Met game in September 18th, 1983 at Shea Stadium. And, I'm a Met fan because of him and my mom, and I'll never forget it. And so much of my relationship with my dad is tied to this team. And so since he loved this show so much, I want to dedicate this edition to him.
Yeah. As we've talked a lot over the past couple of weeks, buddy, you have our condolences. I thought Mets Twitter was phenomenal and reaching out with their love for you. And it was just, I never had the chance to meet your dad, but I definitely heard the stories, and he definitely did the right thing. Well, some would argue maybe he didn't do the right thing, making you the Mets fan that you are today. But he sounded like he was a great guy, and I'm glad his suffering has mercifully come to an end.
It's one of those things. I don't think he had a chance with the Mets because he grew up a Brooklyn Dodger fan. So, he had the choice of going over to the Yankees or waiting around for something else. He chose wait around for something else.
That's my old man did the same thing.
Yeah, that's kind of the that tells you the mentality of which people go, how could you not like the Yankees when they're in the playoffs and the Mets aren't? I'm like, my dad waited 4 years for something else to come along. He was a baseball orphan rather than go with the Yankees. I think I could do that for 2 weeks.
Exactly. That's a good job by your old man there.
Absolutely. Like I said, I will appreciate everything, everything that he has given me. And it was, and as an adult, I got to take him to his last Met game, which was at Citi Field back in 2012, shortly after my mom passed. And so he took me to my first game. I took him to his last. And that will always be special to me as well. So, yeah, it's funny. We talk about it and, how does baseball affect us and work with us off the field? And that's just some of those small ways.
Yep. Fathers and sons in baseball. There's a connection there that is like no other.
Yeah. And I was lucky I had a baseball mom too. So it worked out really well.
Hey, there you go. Even better. 2 for 2.
Yeah, absolutely. So that'll wrap it up, I think, for this week's edition, and certainly appreciate the people that are viewing, the people that are listening, and we will be back shortly with a new episode as we head into off-season mode in this first inaugural season, if you will, of the Happy Recap podcast. EJ, Always a pleasure, my friend, and we will do it again very soon.
Sounds good, my friend. Be well, and let's go Rays.
Absolutely. Let's go Rays. Bye-bye, Braves.